This story happened about 10 years ago, yet the memory still feels sharp enough to cut. I grew up in a modest little house where space was always a quiet battle. For most of my childhood, I shared a bedroom with my older brother. Two twin beds on opposite walls, two dressers squeezed between them, two closets barely big enough for our clothes. It wasn't cramped enough to complain about, but it never felt like freedom either. When my brother left for college, I claimed the territory like a soldier taking a fort. With his blessing, I dragged out his bed and used the empty space to set up a desk I'd been dreaming about for years. At last, I could spread my books out, write late at night, and feel like the room belonged entirely to me. For 2 solid years, it was perfect. Quiet, private, a place to grow into my own skin. Then college ended for him, and the balance shifted again. He landed a job back in our hometown and came home, reclaiming the very room I had built into my sanctuary. My parents called it fair play. After all, I'd taken the space from him first. I couldn't argue, so I moved into the upstairs guest room, a smaller corner room perched above the garage. It had 2 windows set at an angle, one overlooking the driveway, the other peering down the side of the house. The floor vibrated whenever the garage door opened, a harmless quirk that soon became part of the nightly soundtrack. One Friday evening, the house was mine alone. My brother was away on business in Baltimore, and my parents were staying the weekend at our shore house. After a long, punishing day at work, I decided on a night of pure solitude. Take out a book and maybe an early sleep. Around 11:30, I was stretched across the bed, halfway lost in my reading, when the house trembled. The floor shivered in that familiar way, followed by the grinding rumble of the garage door lifting. At first, it barely registered, just an automatic response to a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. But then the truth crashed over me. No one should have been home. My parents were miles away, my brother still out of state. The garage door doesn't rise on its own. My heart started to hammer so hard it hurt. I leapt from the bed, eyes snapping toward the window that overlooked the driveway. Through the darkness, I could make out the shape of the open garage, but not a single car. Every shadow looked alive. I grabbed the first weapon I could think of, an old baseball bat buried in the closet from my Little League days. Phone in hand, I crept downstairs and called 911, whispering to the operator as quietly as my shaking voice allowed. She told me to stay hidden until police arrived. But a reckless instinct pressed me forward. The deeper I moved into the hallway, the clearer the sounds became, faint voices, drawers sliding open, the soft clatter of belongings being shifted. They weren't random noises. Someone was searching. Someone was inside. Adrenaline drowned out fear. I tightened my grip on the bat, took one long breath, and burst into my parents' bedroom with a yell. 2 men froze mid-motion, their faces snapping toward me in startled disbelief. They hadn't expected anyone home, certainly not someone ready to fight. I swung first, catching the closer man on the leg. He howled and stumbled backward. I pivoted toward the second, but he lunged before I could swing again, tackling me with crushing force. We slammed to the floor. He wrenched the bat from my hands and clamped his fingers around my throat. Panic exploded through me as his weight pressed the air from my lungs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the first man crawling closer, something glinting in his hand. A knife, or something that looked far too much like one. In that instant, the truth settled cold and heavy inside me. I might not survive this. I might die right here on the carpet of my parents' bedroom. The room narrowed to a tunnel of sound. My own ragged gasps, the thud of my heartbeat, the scrape of approaching footsteps. Then, faint but unmistakable, the distant wail of sirens cut through the chaos. The man on top of me jerked his head toward the sound. A sudden flash of movement, the baseball bat arcing through the air, and then blackness. When awareness returned, I was staring into the concerned eyes of a police officer. My head throbbed and the room tilted, but I was alive. The back door stood open, curtains fluttering in the night breeze. The intruders were gone, vanished into darkness the moment they heard the sirens. The officers kept me still while paramedics checked for a concussion. I refused the hospital, shaky but coherent enough to recount everything. The sounds, the faces, the way they seemed to know exactly where to go. Yet despite the search that followed, no suspects were ever found. In the days after, a far more unsettling thought took root. The garage door could only be opened with a remote inside my car, a car I often left unlocked in the driveway. Whoever broke in knew that. They also knew my parents were away and my brother out of town. This wasn't random. Someone close enough to learn our routines had orchestrated every second. I don't claim that night changed me forever, but it drew a hard line in my life. There's a before and an after, a version of me who had never stared death in the face, and the version who has. And once you've truly believed your last breath is seconds away, the world never feels the same again. This happened only 6 months ago, and even now the memory clings to me like a shadow I can't shake. I had moved back to my hometown to help care for my aging mother, a stubborn, fiercely independent woman who refused to admit she needed help. Nothing life-threatening, but a few small falls and a recent hip replacement kept me on edge. I kept urging her to wear a medical alert bracelet or install an emergency system, but she always brushed me off. "I'm fine," she'd say. "You worry too much." One quiet evening, I was settling in for the night, a late TV show flickering across the room, when my phone lit up with a local number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a beat, then answered. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. A woman identifying herself as a nurse from the emergency room of a nearby hospital. She told me my mother had suffered a fall, hit her head, and was asking for me. Her tone was gentle but urgent. She knew my mother's full name, her address, and even mentioned the hip replacement from a few months earlier. Every detail lined up so perfectly that I didn't doubt her for a second. The floor seemed to drop out beneath me. I grabbed my keys, heart pounding, and bolted from the house without locking the door. The drive to the hospital felt endless. My mind swirled with worst-case scenarios: internal bleeding, broken bones, surgeries. I rehearsed what I'd say to keep her calm, how I'd convince her to finally accept help. When I burst into the ER, I hurried to the reception desk and blurted out my mother's name. The receptionist's face stayed politely blank as she typed. Then she looked up with a small frown. No patient by that name had been admitted. Confused, I explained about the phone call, the nurse, the fall, the urgent request. The receptionist double-checked every record. Nothing. She suggested I call my mother directly just to be sure. I stepped outside and dialed her landline, my stomach twisting. After 2 rings, my mother answered, groggy and irritated. She'd been asleep the whole time and had no idea what I was talking about. Relief hit me first, sharp and dizzying, followed by a cold realization that nearly knocked me over. Someone had lured me out of my house. I tore back home, every stoplight an enemy. From the driveway, the house looked undisturbed, doors still closed, lights exactly as I'd left them. For a fleeting second, I wondered if paranoia had gotten the better of me. But the moment I stepped inside, the truth revealed itself like a trap snapping shut. Drawers gaped open. Cushions were overturned. My television was gone, along with my laptop and the small jewelry box in my bedroom. They hadn't just stolen valuables, though. Family photos had been stripped from their frames. Only the pictures were missing. The frames themselves remained. In the bathroom, my prescription bottles were gone, every label peeled away as if someone wanted more than just the medication. It was theft, yes, but it felt like something far darker. They took pieces of my identity, faces from my childhood, medical details, private fragments of my life that held almost no street value but immense personal weight. I called the police, still shaking. They listened carefully as I repeated the phone call word for word. The officers exchanged grim looks. Whoever set this up had access to details no stranger should know. My mother's surgery, her address, the perfect timing of a quiet evening when I'd be alone. None of it was random. They searched for evidence but found nothing useful. Fingerprints were smudged or absent, and there were no usable security cameras nearby. They suggested possible identity theft, a long game where personal photos and medical information could be worth more than electronics. Then they left, promising to follow up if any leads surfaced. For days, I replayed the call in my head, trying to identify the voice, the subtle inflections. My mother swore she hadn't shared her information with anyone suspicious, but she's friendly to a fault. Maybe she mentioned too much to a casual acquaintance, someone who listened more closely than she realized. The silence that followed was almost worse than the break-in itself. No further calls, no suspicious charges, just a yawning uncertainty that someone out there knew exactly who we were and what mattered to us. I finally installed a Ring camera on the front door, hoping the sight of it might scare off whoever orchestrated that night. It's a small comfort, a blinking eye in the dark. I still don't know if the thieves were after quick money, my identity, or something more personal. All I know is that they know far too much about me, and they haven't been caught. If anything else happens, I'll have an update. But for now, I'm left with nothing but questions and a house that no longer feels like home. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, and for a little over a year I've been living alone in a quiet rented house on the edge of town. It's the kind of place you barely notice when you drive past. A squat, one-story home with faded blue siding and a porch that creaks when the wind blows. After years of chaotic roommates and noisy apartments, the stillness felt like a luxury at first. No neighbors blasting music through paper-thin walls. No unexpected visitors. Just me, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the steady rhythm of my own routines. The neighborhood itself is sleepy in a way that's almost too perfect. Families walking dogs at sunset. Kids riding bikes in slow circles until dusk. I told myself I wanted the peace and privacy, but sometimes the silence at night feels almost staged, like everyone else is pretending to sleep while something just out of sight is watching. One evening, after a long day at work, I sank into the couch with a book. The house was wrapped in its usual hush, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood. Around 10 o'clock, the quiet splintered. A single heavy pound rattled the front door. I froze. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a deliberate echoing thud that reverberated through the floorboards. My heart jumped into my throat. No one had called ahead. No headlights glowed in the driveway. I waited, holding my breath, convincing myself it was a branch or maybe the wind. Then it came again. 3 sharp, bone-deep thumps, each one harder than the last. I edged toward the door, every instinct screaming not to. The porch light was off. I hadn't bothered to turn it on earlier. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but a smear of darkness. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was standing just out of view. A third round of pounding shook the door so violently I felt it in my chest. This wasn't random. Someone wanted inside. I backed away, grabbing my phone with trembling hands. My mind raced through options: call the police, shout a warning, flick the lights to let them know I was awake. Before I could act, the pounding stopped. Silence reclaimed the house, thicker than before. I waited, every nerve stretched tight, straining for the sound of footsteps, a car door, anything, nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator again, steady and mocking. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. I checked the locks, deadbolt secure, windows latched, and forced myself to breathe. Maybe a prank. Maybe a drunk neighbor at the wrong door. That's what I told myself as I double-checked the back door, as if words could make the fear shrink. But the feeling didn't fade. It clung to the corners of the room, a quiet certainty that someone had been standing on the other side of that door, listening. Despite not being able to see anyone through the peephole, the certainty of a presence outside refused to leave me. I stood there in the living room, every light blazing, waiting for another sound. A car engine, a retreating footstep, the creak of the porch. Nothing. The silence was so complete it almost felt staged, as if whoever had been pounding on the door was still there, holding their breath just as I held mine. Eventually, I convinced myself to call the police. My voice shook as I explained that someone had been aggressively knocking and then vanished. The dispatcher promised to send a patrol car and stayed on the line with me until headlights swept across the windows. 2 officers walked the property, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found no footprints in the damp grass, no scuff marks on the porch, not even a stray leaf disturbed near the door. One officer asked if I might have imagined it. Maybe a branch had fallen. Maybe a neighbor's kid thought it would be funny to knock and run. I wanted to believe him, but I knew the difference between a child's prank and the deliberate, gut-shaking force I'd felt through that door after they left. I locked every bolt and wedged a chair under the doorknob like some desperate movie character. Sleep never came. I sat upright in bed, ears tuned to every creak of the old house, until the sky lightened with morning. The next day, I went over every inch of the porch in daylight, searching for anything the officers might have missed. That's when I noticed it. On the far corner of the door frame, just above the handle, was a small smear of grayish residue, like ash or charcoal. It wasn't there the day before. I was sure of it. I touched it and felt a gritty texture that left a faint streak on my fingers. I scrubbed it off, but the unease only deepened. Whoever had come to my door hadn't just knocked. They had left a mark, small, deliberate, and meant to be noticed. That night, I installed the Ring camera I'd been putting off for months. The blinking blue light became my only comfort, a mechanical eye standing guard. But even with the camera watching, the feeling of exposure lingered. Every gust of wind against the siding, every distant footstep on the sidewalk sent a bolt of electricity through my chest. Weeks have passed since that night. No more pounding, no more strange calls, no more signs of intrusion. But the stillness hasn't returned to what it once was. The house feels different now. Less like a refuge and more like a stage waiting for the next act. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine a figure standing just beyond the camera's field of view. Maybe they're testing the limits of my attention. Maybe they're waiting for me to let my guard down. I don't know if the pounding was a random scare, a failed break-in, or something more personal, someone who knows exactly how to rattle me without ever stepping inside. All I know is that I've stopped thinking of this house as quiet. Quiet implies safety. This house isn't quiet, it's listening.